Hi all you fellow mages out there, Anthony Murphy here from Anthony's Analysis. You may have heard of me from the Mage Wars Facebook website, as well as Ethereum Chronicles, the bi-weekly Mage Wars newsletter. Today is the first episode of Anthony's Analysis video series, when we're going to be discussing early game aggression versus late game supremacy. We're going to talk about what mages work best with these two strategies, what cards these mages have to kind of build off of each other, and how you can use these ideas in your games. Let's get started. Early game aggression. What does early game aggression mean? And which mages are the best at doing this kind of thing in the arena? Well, first I want to say that I firmly believe every mage is capable of playing both sides of this equation. That is to say, all mages are fully capable of playing both early game aggression as well as late game supremacy. However, there's one specific mage that I'm going to use during this Anthony's Analysis to talk about early game aggression. Running at your opponent from turn one, full tilt, ready to cut their head off and consume them with all your nasty creatures. So let's take a look.
Early game aggression.
For early game aggression, one of the first things you need to know is the arena itself. Even if your opponent stays fixated in this corner, which most defensive players are apt to do, or this side of the board, you're still not going to be able to get to them in less than 3 turns. 1, 2, 3. Of course, in the absence of spells like teleport, etc. So, this gives us some time to develop ourselves on the way to the opponent. How can we do that? Well, the most important concept of early game aggression is to always move towards your opponent as much as possible. So we're going to do that. We move as close to our opponent as possible, and now we have some actions to take. One of the best actions that I can think of to take for the Warlock in the early game is Lash of Hellfire. It's a cheap spell. It attacks both air and ground, throws some damage out there in terms of burn tokens, and it's just a great resource to have. How can we amplify this, however? Fire Shaper Ring is a great way to do it. Adds extra damage to a lot of the different abilities the Warlock can bring into play. The other option is Gauntlets of Strength. Gauntlets of Strength is a great backup plan to have in case the Lash of Hellfire or the Fire Shaper Ring happen to get dissolved by the opponent. This adds a little bit of extra kick to your attacks in melee and still allows you to hit like a truck. So we've got these in play. We're moving towards our opponent continually. Our next turn, what can we do? We start to get within medium range of the opponent. We're not yet there yet. What can we do? One of the best things we can do as a Warlock is to lay down some curses. It's one of his signature things that he can do, and they're really powerful at limiting the options of your opponent. That's the second key. Move towards your opponent, get your stuff ready for melee combat, and limit the options of your opponent. Never give them anything for free. Curses are a great way to do that. So what kind of curses can we use? Well, Agony, Marked for Death, Ghoul Rot, and Chains of Agony. These 4, in my opinion, exemplify the curses that the Warlocks are capable of leveraging against their opponents. These are great spells that always limit the options of your opponent. They do great damage, they limit them in different ways, and do some really nifty stuff. How can we amplify these, however? Well, Ring of Curses is a great way. Pays for itself in 1, maximum 2 turns, and in general saves you mana so that you can cast other attack spells and be even more offensive as the game goes on. Great way to make up for the fact that the Warlock only channels 9 mana a turn. The other way to amplify curses, Moloch's Torment. Why is this a good way to amplify your curses? Why is it good for early game aggression? Well, because its ability is a passive ability. What does that mean? It means that you don't have to spend an action to do it, it just happens. If they have a curse on them and you have Moloch's Torment, you spend a mana at the start of your turn, they take damage. It's direct damage, which travels through armor and magical resistances alike, meaning there's not a whole lot that they can do about it. Okay, so next round, we're going to enter into melee combat with them, or become very close to melee combat with them. Okay, we're getting into grips with the enemy. What to do at this point? There's two different options. If the opponent is being wily and is teleporting around or running, trying to get away from you, one of the things that you can do is cast Elemental Wand and bind a spell to it and try to hit them at range. Two different spells that you can bind to this thing that I tend to recommend. One, Fireball. Two, Flame Blast. Fireball is the more powerful of the two. It's got a better burn chance and a lot more dice to it. It's also more expensive, but in general, I tend to pay that extra mana in order to hit as hard as possible. Flame Blast, on the other hand, is a situational card. This card I like to use against mages, enemy mages, that have defenses, such as the Force Master. She won't be able to deflect its attack because Flame Blast has Unavoidable. Great spell to use in those types of circumstances. The other option besides Elemental Wand, if they have some equipment that might cause you trouble when you finally close the gap and start lashing away with your Lash of Hellfire, is to explode it. Okay? Explode not only gets rid of the equipment, but also deals damage and can burn them. Overall, it's a great way to combine two effects into one. You get rid of the equipment that might cause you trouble, as well as attack them and continually burn them, on top of moving in for an attack. So those are the two things you should remember. Always move towards your opponent. Be ready for when you get there, and limit their options. This, even though it is a basic idea, is how you play early game aggression. So now we've seen early game aggression with the Warlock and all of his nasty fire tidbits. But let's transition for a moment and take a look at some late game supremacy. Which mage is fully capable of taking advantage of these nasty tricks that extend the game into the long term and set traps that your opponent will not be able to get themselves out of? Let's take a look. Late game superiority. Okay, for late game superiority, there's a couple of other things that you need to know that are kind of counter to the early game aggression, and here we have the guy that I'm going to use today to exemplify late game superiority, the Wizard. However, just like I mentioned in the introduction of this video series of Anthony's analysis, all mages can play both aggressive and offensive. For example, the Wizard can summon out a Dark Fin Hydra on his first turn, and second turn run to the center of the board, followed by a teleport that slings the Hydra directly in the face of the enemy. This could be considered an aggressive Wizard. But, in general, there are scenarios against certain enemies where the Wizard may not be able to feasibly do this with any real result. So, in that case, the Wizard can summon out some different creatures, some different spells and resources in order to play the late game and build up a slow advantage over time. Depending on who he's going up against, if you're going up against as a late game superiority Wizard, if you're going up against somebody who you know, for example, a Warlock, is going to be careening towards you at breakneck speed, one of the best people I like to play is the Gorgon Archer. Now this little beauty has a great attack. It's got weak tokens on it, and weak tokens, every time they stack on the Warlock or other early game aggressor, will reduce the amount of dice that that person is capable of rolling against you. Always a good spell to start the game with, even though it is a slow creature. Now, an alternative to the Gorgon Archer would be something like a move, or even standing still and casting Gate to Voltari. This is one of the best spawn points in the game so far, in my opinion, because the enemy is probably going to be casting spells every single turn, and every time they do it, this spawn point gains mana. It also generates 1 mana of its own accord, which is also why I like to play Harmonize on the Gate to Voltari. Now it's generating 2 mana of its own accord every turn, on top of an additional couple of mana every turn, every time your enemy casts and resolves a spell. This will be slinging out arcane creatures very, very quickly. Another thing that you can do instead of slinging out Harmonize would be to cast Moonglow Amulet on yourself as fast as possible. The extra mana that it gives you for channeling every turn will add up over time, and eventually in late game allow you to cast more spells that you otherwise would not be able to cast. After you've gotten some of your hooks in terms of your spawn point in play, maybe a creature or two, some mana channeling, then you can start worrying about building up your presence on the board. And how are you going to do that? Teleport Trap is a prime example. You can place the Teleport Trap here, here, or even in your home zone face down. When the enemy aggressive player comes careening towards you, you reveal Teleport Trap and knock them back a couple of spaces. It buys you a whole turn, wastes their turn and their action, and allows you to take somewhat of the tempo of the game away from him. Another defensive type spell that will make the game get pushed out into the long term is Nullify. I love this card. It's a great card. Whenever you or the creature you cast it on is attacked by an incantation or enchantment, simply reveal it. They've wasted their spell. You destroy, nullify. They even waste their mana to go along with it, and mana is a very important thing for an aggressive player, which leads into the late game. One of the best things you can do with a wizard moving into the late game, before you get to the late game and moving into the late game, is mana denial. Mana denial is very strong against people who already naturally channel very low amounts of mana. How can you do this? Well, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. Suppression Orb, Mordok's Obelisk, and Mana Siphon. All three of these things tax your opponent severely on their mana supply. However, all three of these things are relatively weak and will not stick around on the board very long if you don't protect them or place them wisely. So this is what I like to do. You Mana Siphon your opponent, reduce their channeling value. Mordok's Obelisk and Suppression Orb, make sure that they're spread out so they can't be taken out in very quick succession from one another. And then guard them, in general, with suppressive firepower from one of these two zones, or creatures that are coming from the Gate of Voltari. This locks your opponent down. You've got a greater mana supply coming from your early game items. They have less mana supply coming from these kinds of items, and you can start to build up a supreme late game advantage that sees your mana supply much greater than your opponent's. You use that excess mana to summon out some game-finishing creatures or spells and end the game for your opponent. This is a prime example of how to play, even though it's a basic idea, how to play late game superiority. So, late game supremacy versus early game aggression? Which one is the true leader in terms of the overall Mage Wars community? Well, I have with me here a good friend of mine, Nathan, who has been a good competitor of mine throughout the time that we have played Mage Wars in South Korea. He's a member of our gaming group here, and he plays a warlock, a very mean one at that, might I say. So, Nathan, specifically with the warlock in mind, what are some things that people can do to engage this idea of early game aggression, of getting into the enemy and putting some hurt on them right away in order to end the game as fast as possible in your favor?
Alright, well, the thing to remember about the Warlock is he's a really strong fighter right out of the gate. So something you can definitely do is build that up in early game. Lash of Hellfire allows you to attack things in the sky and on ground. Not only that, you can supplement this with all the curses he has at his command. Getting swamped by creatures? Put Agony on them. Make it so that they get hurt every time they try to attack you. They try to get away? Chains of Agony. Make sure they can't get away without it costing them something. These sorts of tactics are what the Warlock can really utilize in order to make sure that the early game belongs to him.
Sure, yeah, definitely. Especially, I like the idea of chains of agony on an enemy, so if they try to get away from that Lash of Hellfire, it's going to cost them dearly. That little bit of extra damage may add up over time and sway the course of the game. Okay, so finally, are there any potential weaknesses that the Warlock has that he might need to look out for in terms of an enemy trying to blunt his onslaught, to extend the game into the long term and overtake him?
Well, certainly there is. The thing to remember with the way I play the Warlock is that I play him kind of like an attacking tank with a little bit of cursing in order to supplement that. The problem becomes when I have way too many creatures trying to kill me at the same time. Beastmaster can do this very easily. There are a few others as well. Not only that, but my curses, for them to be very effective, well, I can't have people disenchanting them every single turn, which the wizard, being an arcane specialist, is able to do pretty easily.
Sure, yeah, much more so than a lot of the other mages that are available in Mage Wars, because he has access to that arcane school to kind of blunt all those curses and get them off of his important stuff as fast as possible. Well, Nathan, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I can't wait to meet you again in the arena.
I look forward
Hopefully
to it.
I'll come out on top, but you never know. I may burn to death under his onslaught. Thanks for watching the very first episode of Anthony's Analysis. I would love to hear your comments. Please don't hesitate to check out the link below to the Mage Wars website on Facebook. It's where I spend a lot of time commenting on up-and-coming cards that have not yet been released yet, and it's where you can see some more of Anthony's analysis. Take care until next time. Bye-bye.
The strongest mage in the land.
Each edition of Mage Wars comes with a small cat.
Oh.
This is what we got when we unboxed our game.
This is the Korean Mage Wars game.
Yes! A cat.
Comes with free cat.